Imagine that you're at an amusement park riding a Ferris wheel. You rise higher and higher above a sea of red and white tents. The smell of popcorn fills your nose, and you can hear the clacking of a nearby roller coaster, followed by excited screams. What else do you see, hear, feel, and smell? Can you imagine it in your mind's eye? This internal experience is all effortlessly generated by your brain. Weighing just 3 pounds, our brains control everything in our bodies and are capable of carrying out mind-boggling calculations while only sustaining on the food we eat. This incredible organ is responsible for everything that we do, think, and feel. Already, technology has been consistently improving aspects of our physical bodies, such as glasses to see or hearing aids to hear. But could something similar be done for the brain? Imagine what we could accomplish if we gave the mind direct access to our most advanced technology. Over the next 5 videos, we'll take you through a neuroscience crash course, paying special attention to areas of the brain and specific functions that are important to understand when talking about neurotechnology. I'm Harrison Canning, and in this video, we'll discuss some basic brain structures. First, let's start with neuroanatomy. Although each brain is unique, just as every house has a bathroom or bedroom, there are distinct structural patterns that every brain has in common. How these patterns relate to function is a harder problem. However, as the medical field progressed, we began to understand basic neurological functions in more detail by observing the effects of brain injury on patients. However, as the medical field progressed, we began to understand basic neurological functions in more detail by observing the effects of brain injury on patients. It was noticed that injuries taking place at different locations in the brain resulted in behavioral changes. These early structural and functional observations allowed for the categorization and naming of brain structures and eventually paved the way for further advances in neuroscience. The brain consists of 3 main divisions: the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. Let's start with the brainstem, which is located at the bottom of the brain. The brainstem connects the brain to the rest of the body through the spinal cord. Most of its matter is taken up by neural fibers going to and from the rest of the body, but it does have 1 billion neurons of its own which modulate basic essential functions like breathing, heart rate, body temperature, wake and sleep cycles, digestion, and others. The cerebellum, Latin for little brain, is a small bulbous structure located behind the brainstem. Despite its comparatively small size to the cerebrum, due to its many tight folds, this structure holds about half of all neurons in the brain. Evolutionarily speaking, the cerebellum is much older than the cerebrum. While neuroscientists agree that it may have other roles, it is most involved in coordinating voluntary motor movements such as posture and balance, and it may have some applications in speech as well. It is also important for learning new motor skills. The cerebrum is the largest of these divisions. It's the upper portion of the brain and is split into the right and left hemispheres. The cerebrum is responsible for most of your cognitive processing, including sensory processing, the generation of motor commands, executive functioning, memory formation, and emotional regulation. Because of its wide breadth of functions and its applicability in brain-computer interfacing, this will be the primary focus of our study. One of the first things you will notice when looking at the cerebrum is that it is quite wrinkly. This folding of the brain increases its surface area. While the brain is only about 16 centimeters long from front to back, an unfolded cerebral cortex is about 48 centimeters squared. This is about the size of a standard cloth napkin. These hills and valleys are called gyri and sulci. The singular form is gyrus and sulcus. Deep sulci are called fissures. These fissures produce neat divisions between the hemispheres and create 4 distinct lobes in each hemisphere. They are the frontal lobe at the front of your brain, the temporal lobe by your ears, the parietal lobe at the top of your head, and the occipital lobe at the back. Each lobe in the cerebrum is subdivided into its own functional units. Let's start with the frontal lobe of the cortex. Right at the front of the cerebrum is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex plays an important role in executive functioning, which refers to complex cognitive tasks like self-control, decision-making, problem-solving, planning, emotional regulation, and rational thought. This part of the brain compiles processed sensory information and makes decisions and plans objectives. It also seems to be highly correlated with personality traits. Directly behind this region are the motor areas of the brain. As you might guess, this is the part of the brain that gets you moving. We will talk more about this in the next unit. Lastly, Broca's area, located here, is responsible for the production of speech. Let's move down to the temporal lobe. This region houses the limbic system, the primary auditory cortex, and Wernicke's area. The limbic system is located deep inside the brain. It's comprised of many well-understood subunits that are involved in motivation, emotion, learning and memory, and your sense of smell. On the surface of the temporal lobe, we find the primary auditory cortex. This is the first stop for auditory processing in your brain. Just behind the primary auditory cortex, we find Wernicke's area, which helps us understand language. The parietal lobe integrates information from our senses to direct our attention to important objects in our environment. The somatosensory cortex, at the anterior side of the parietal lobe, gives us our sense of touch. Finally, the occipital lobe, located at the back of the brain, does our visual processing. It is significantly larger than the other sensory processing centers. This is because vision is our primary sense. Although the brain is what controls human behavior and cognition, it would not be all that useful if it couldn't connect to the rest of the body. Most of this is done through the spinal cord, which is essentially a bundle of nerve fibers. These fibers allow the brain to communicate with the motor and sensory pathways throughout the body in order to allow you to move. They also allow for the regulation of organs and give rise to our sense of touch. The brain and the spinal cord together make up the central nervous system. However, this is only half of the story. There is a network of branching nerves and neuron clusters that connect the central nervous system to organs, muscles, and sensory areas like your eyes or your ears. Together, all of these nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nerves, which originate from the brain, are called cranial nerves and usually end in the region around the head and neck. The 12 cranial nerves provide connections to facial and neck muscles and to the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. The peripheral nervous system can be further divided into somatic and autonomic components. The somatic nervous system allows for voluntary movements, which refers to controlling muscles used to perform actions such as walking, speaking, and grabbing objects. On the other hand, the autonomic nervous system manages involuntary control. This is how the brain regulates breathing, heart rate, and digestion without having to consciously think about them. Now that we have learned how to talk about different regions of the brain, let's talk about how different areas correlate to function. The degree to which functions are restricted to one specific area or not has been a source of great debate within neuroscience between two competing factions, the localizationists and the distributionists.
In this corner, the localizationists.
The localization theory suggests that brain functions are localized to specific, discernible regions and that each neuron is vital to a task. Based on this logic, the German anatomist Corbinian Brodmann identified 52 brain regions with their own unique cell structure. He postulated that each of these regions would correspond to a different function, which turned out to be partially true, as some of his structures are known to play very specific roles in language and in motor, visual, auditory, and other sensory processing.
In the other corner, the distributionists.
This theory suggests that brain functions are not localized, but rather involve multiple regions of the brain. This theory does not say that regions don't specialize in certain tasks, but spreads the cognitive load across many areas. Memory, for example, is understood to be a distributed process that involves multiple brain regions. While the primary sensory processing areas are fairly localized, our integration of them, or our ability to combine them, is a distributed process. Brain function is likely not as black and white as either party would have us believe. The truth is, both theories have a lot of merit when combined. Sensory, motor, and linguistic abilities are well mapped to a few specific areas, while memory and higher cognitive processing is distributed across larger regions of the brain. The brain is also fairly robust, and research suggests that, on the small scale, different functions are reliant on small populations of neurons rather than single neurons. All of this evidence tells us that some functions are localized to a broad area, while others, like executive functioning, are a process that calls on neurons all over the brain. In addition to the terms used to describe the gross structures of the human brain, we need to be able to orient ourselves in between structures. While it's helpful in videos such as these, we can't use terms like front of the brain in scientific literature because the term front or back can change based on the brain's orientation. Because of this, neuroscientists have developed terms to describe relative locations in the brain. First, anterior and rostral both describe an object that is toward the front of the brain. Posterior and caudal both describe objects toward the back of the brain. For example, the brainstem is rostral to the cerebellum, but caudal to the frontal lobe. Dorsal describes structures on the top of your head, and ventral describes structures on the underside of the brain. We use the term medial to describe objects close to the center of the brain, and lateral to describe objects far from the midline. As an example, a structure called the thalamus is medial to Wernicke's area. As you might have guessed, you can combine these terms together to say something like, X structure is medial, dorsal, and caudal to another. Okay, so that was a lot of vocab, but knowing these brain regions will help you understand and participate in neuroscience conversations. Let's recap. In this lesson, we learned that neuroscientists have created many divisions in the brain based on structural and functional cues. We learned that the brain has three main regions: the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum, the last of which can be further divided into 4 lobes. We learned that the brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system connects to muscles and organs. We gained the tools to describe relative brain areas such as rostral, caudal, dorsal, ventral, medial, and lateral. Finally, we learned that different functions may be localized to specific areas, or they might spread out through the brain. In the next 2 lectures, we will talk about areas of the brain that we know are pretty localized. These are the areas responsible for giving you your senses and ability to move. It is really important that we learn about these areas because they will become important to our brain-computer interfaces.